In many countries, stray foxes are a common occurrence, but one fox in particular fascinated people with its actions. In Turkey, a shaggy and dirty stray fox trotted down the street, a common occurrence as it scavenged for food and water. The day started like any other, with the fox happily trotting down the road, its bushy tail swaying as it greeted anyone who looked its way. Despite living on the streets, the fox was friendly and loved getting pets from passers-by. As the fox made its way down a particular street, it suddenly smelled something delicious. It followed its nose until it found itself in front of a butcher's shop. Looking through the window, the fox watched customers buying large cuts of meat. Just looking at the food made the fox realize how hungry it was, and its stomach let out a loud growl. Inside the shop, a young woman named Annie was finishing her purchase of a couple of large steaks. Once she was done, she thanked the butcher and made her way out of the shop. Outside, Annie started walking down the street toward her home when she heard a loud gurgle and a whimper. The confused young woman turned around and saw the stray fox looking back at her with sad eyes. Once again, the fox's stomach growled, and Annie knew it was clearly a hungry stray. Seeing the hungry animal, Annie immediately felt sympathy for it. She looked down at the steak she had just bought and marched back into the butcher's shop. She asked for any cut-offs or bones that the man wouldn't sell. The butcher happily gave her what she wanted. Annie exited the shop and found the stray fox watching her from a distance. She crouched down on the floor and carefully held out the bone she had obtained for it. At first, the fox was cautious and didn't want to get too close. But as Annie held the food out to it, the fox couldn't resist and crept closer to accept the meal. Finally, Annie gained enough of the fox's trust that it started wagging its tail and accepted the large bone from her. Instead of eating the food right there, the fox picked it up and began walking away as if it had somewhere to be. Confused by the fox's reaction but not wanting to question it too much, Annie simply stood back up and made her way back home. The next day, Annie was walking down the street when she noticed the same stray fox from the previous day. The animal seemed to have noticed her as well and happily bounded up to Annie with its tail wagging. Annie smiled at the fox's enthusiasm and began to fuss over it. Unfortunately, she couldn't spend too much time with the animal because she had other commitments. Before leaving, she made sure to buy the fox some sausages from a nearby shop. Once again, the fox didn't eat them straight away and walked off. Annie was curious about the animal's behavior, but she didn't have time to follow it and had to go about her day. On the third day, Annie found the stray fox once again, and this time it looked like it was waiting for her. Annie had started carrying treats in her bag, hoping to give them to the poor stray. She gave the fox the treats this time, and when the fox turned around and walked away, Annie decided to follow it. They eventually came to a busy street, and Annie watched as the shaggy fox made its way over to a storm drain. The fox sat down next to the drain and looked down into it. It then dropped one of the treats that Annie had just given it into it before eating its own share. Annie was very confused about the fox's behavior, but she didn't have time to investigate further that day. Over the next few days, Annie would find the fox sitting and staring into the storm drain every time she brought it treats. It would always drop half of the food into the drain before eating its share. Annie became so curious that she decided to take a look inside the drain herself. She never expected what she would find. Annie crept over to the storm drain, wary of the fox standing guard next to it. However, the fox simply watched her curiously. When Annie looked into the drain, she gasped at what she saw. Immediately, she reached for her phone and called the fire department. She would need their help. Roughly half an hour later, a couple of firemen arrived and asked Annie what was wrong. She explained to them what she had seen, and the men quickly got to work. They walked over to the storm drain, but the stray fox began to growl at them, causing the firemen to stop. Annie reassured the fox and offered it a treat, gaining its trust. With the stray fox out of the way, the firemen opened the storm drain. By this point, a crowd had gathered to see what was happening. After a few tense minutes, the firemen revealed what the stray fox had been so focused on inside the drain. In one of the firemen's arms was a tiny kitten. All of the bystanders were shocked, but that wasn't the end of it. The firemen went back into the storm drain 4 more times, each time emerging with another kitten. Annie was astounded by what she was witnessing. She knew that something was down there as she had seen it when she peeked in, but she had no idea that 5 tiny and adorable kittens had been trapped. The stray fox managed to wriggle out of Annie's arms and bounded over to the firemen, showing great enthusiasm for the kittens. Annie walked over to the firemen and explained to them that she would take the kittens home with her and care for them until they were ready to be rehomed. The firemen agreed and gave the kittens to Annie. Annie began making her way back home, but she turned around and called out to the stray fox. "Come on, Benny," she said. "It's time to go home." The fox happily bounded up to her, and Annie knew that she had fallen in love with him. She couldn't bear to leave him on the streets after what he had done for the tiny kittens. The family lived happily together, with neither Fudge the cat nor Benny the stray fox worried about ending up on the streets again. Annie loved them too much, and they loved her just as much in return. What an incredible story. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with more awesome tales.